Hey, everybody. Welcome to Tell Me More. This is such a cool episode. It is actually a podcast within a podcast, I would say. So, as you all know, I talk a lot about patient conversations and how to make them better. But I also really love talking to my colleagues. I love talking to doctors, especially physician entrepreneurs. So, in this segment, we're calling it the business of caring. And we're talking to people, doctors who have been really successful at caring for patients. My guest today is no stranger to any of that. In fact, he is a very busy man, in a lot of ways, way busier than me. Thankfully, he's a lot younger than me, so he can do it. It is Dr. Bradley Block, a practicing otolaryngologist from New York. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm not that much younger than you. I'm actually about to turn 44 in less than a month. So, I am tired. I am tired. I am doing a lot and I am tired. Yeah.
That's fair. So you're experienced, you're seasoned, just like I am. I love that. So I have to ask you this question. When did we stop calling you guys otorhinolaryngologists and go to just otolaryngologists? Like my entire career, it was otorhinolaryngologist for the ENT, ear, nose, and throat. Was that just a thing because people got tired of it?
You know, for my entire career, so I started residency in 2006. It's always been otolaryngology. It might be because you're in Pennsylvania. Because I know at Penn, which is Penn, it's otorhinolaryngology. But in most of the rest of the country, it's just otolaryngology, which is completely leaving out the nose. Right?
Yeah.
But that's not even the full title. It's actually technically otolaryngology head and neck surgery because we're not just doing everything transorally, transnasal, endoscopically. We're also I don't do these things anymore, but we'll do a lot of open neck surgery, like laryngectomies and thyroids and submandibular glands and neck masses and bronchial cleft cysts and all the things that go along with open. So it's not just otolaryngology. It should be otorhinolaryngology head and neck surgery. And I think at this point, the listeners are bored, but I'm going to tell them one more interesting fact that actually I think it was in the early 70s that ophthalmology and otorhinolaryngology became two different specialties because up until the early 70s, it was all one specialty.
You are kidding.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that scares me. Like if my eye doctor that did my LASIK procedure was trying to do my sinus surgery, I would like run for the hills. That is crazy. Very funny. So interesting though. So you are an otolaryngologist. Okay, so here's the other thing I want to talk to you about. So you are an entrepreneur. You are a partner in a large ENT practice, right?
Yes.
But you're also a practicing physician, which means you talk to patients in an office setting. But you also do surgery. So there's this whole other layer. So tell me how you manage and I'm just talking about your medical side now, your work schedule from a medical side. We'll talk about the podcast and all the other stuff you do too. But how do you do that?
Well, so my practice is because we are the private practice. We are at this point 250 physicians.
Wow.
170 or 177 of whom are partners, equal share partners. So we started off the doctors that originally formed the practice. They were 3 offices that I think in the Upper East Side of Manhattan and Westchester that got together, formed a practice, and they decided what they were going to do is when people joined the practice, they would join as equal partners. Now you've got some sweat equity, right? You don't come in residency partner. You've got to earn your way to partnership. But once you're a partner, you are equal partner. And then we're run by a physician board. So I have kind of juggled my practice responsibilities with how much time I've had. So when I was single, I used to go to all the board meetings. I was on a bunch of committees. So we have these committees within the practice that advise the board. The board is elected. There are 7 board members, one of whom is the president, and they're the management arm, but they see patients all day just like the rest of us. So I'm not managing the practice. Recently, I started the patient experience committee, which does what it sounds like it does because I felt like that was something that was missing from our practice, and we're certainly doing that a whole lot better now. But you can be a partner in our practice and just see patients and go home.
Wow.
So it is designed in such a way that if you have expertise, if you have an interest, be on a committee, run for the board. But if
Wow.
not, you want to put your head down and see your patients, you can do that too. So it's not that I have to do these things. And the operating room schedule, it just fits into my clinic schedule. Like it's just rather than seeing patients 5 days a week, I see patients 4 days a week, and one day I operate, and sometimes I take call.
Yeah.
So, it all just kind of fits together. The podcast, that's the hard part. Cause I've, like, as we talked about before the show, I've 3 little kids. And so I started this when I had a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old. That's
Wow.
when I put out my first episode, which I'm not sure when this is airing, but my first episode was August 8th, 2018. So now I've been podcasting for 5 years. So now
Wow.
we have a third one, and they're all a little older. And I podcast after bedtime, but now bedtime's gotten later. And so, juggling all that is the challenge. My practice, no problem. That's just, 9 to 5, whatever, 8 to 6, whatever the workday is.
You make it sound like you're making a sandwich, and it's really, I'm fairly confident it's a lot more complicated than that. But so let me ask you this: why the podcast? So obviously you have a very, full CV. You went to SUNY, you did your residency at Georgetown, chief resident, you're a partner in this mega practice, you do surgery, you obviously care a lot about patients. Why start a podcast?
You sound like my wife. She's like, isn't it enough? You're a successful physician. Isn't it enough? And the
Right.
thing is, we're constantly training. We're constantly trying to be better. And so when I started the podcast, it was my effort to be better at something that I felt like I was lacking in. And it may not come across in podcast form because, I take, when I'm being interviewed or like when I'm on my show, I take my personality and I turn it up to 11. That's not who I am. Like, I'm not this animated person. I've got some social anxiety, which I didn't realize until I was older that I even had. It was part of
Wow.
why I had what someone might argue would be like a drinking problem in college, because it just made me nervous. Like I didn't know how to interact otherwise. And so the whole idea behind the podcast was to get me better at that doctor-patient interaction. Get me better so that the patient feels more fulfilled, get me better so that I can move through my schedule more efficiently and enjoy it more. That's when I started it. At this point, now I'm 12 years into my practice, and it's also the thing I like to talk about the most. Like, Brad, how's your day? Fine. The pathology that I see is the same pathology that I've been seeing. And I'm finding that among my peers. They've been doing this for 10, 15 years, and it's the same pathology most of the time. And it gets, hedonic adaptation. It's just not as stimulating as it once was. And so
Right.
I find that by podcasting, I'm learning things from my guests that then I can incorporate into my practice. Maybe it's within the exam room. Maybe it's outside the exam room. So the benefits of the podcast have kind of evolved over time. At beginning, it was to help me be better. And now it's also to keep me stimulated.
Wow. So it is something you do for the betterment of yourself, but obviously your guests take away something from it. Your listeners for sure take away something from it, but it started from a place where you wanted to be better and keep yourself fresh and excited. I totally get that. So here's a very hard question. We're talking about the business of caring, right? Business implies, some level of success, but let's be real about it. It implies making money, right? So we are all, those of us that are in business for ourselves are, for the most part, driven by success and being able to support our families and hopefully do better for ourselves financially than we would if we were punching a clock for a hospital or an insurer or whatever the thing is. So you carve out this giant chunk of time between, partner, practice, surgery, 3 kids, wife, to do this podcast. Has that podcast led to financial success?
No. Period. End of sentence. No, I'm totally in the red from the cost of editing, the cost of, where my website is, where the media host, and I've hired people to help me try and get my message out there, my voice out there. And I've recently had more advertising, but it certainly isn't, cumulatively, I'm nowhere near being in the black. I am still very, very deeply in the red. If you're measuring it from a financial success alone. But if you were to incorporate the fact that I'm able to move more efficiently through my schedule, get home sooner than I would have without doing the show, that's another measure of success.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, no, I have not created a successful business yet, but I know from talking to other entrepreneurs that it's an iterative process, and I will keep at this until I figure out a way to make this successful. And I've got, a couple of other ideas in mind for different ways that I can make that happen. Because one, it's the sunk cost fallacy, which is I've already been doing this for 5 years, so I can't stop now.
Can't stop now, right?
It's a cognitive bias, and I'm falling in that trap. So I'm definitely falling for the sunk cost fallacy. But also I enjoy it. I do enjoy it. Sometimes I look at my schedule and I'm like, oh, you know what? I really just want to watch the next episode of The Bear with my wife tonight. I really want to do that.
That's a fantastic show.
It's an amazing show. I just started watching it. It's my new. We used to be Ted Lasso addicts. Now we're Bear addicts.
That's a great show too. Yeah.
So I want to do that. And I look, and I'm like, oh, another interview. But then I will sit down at my desk, get them on the screen, and I love it. I really enjoy the connections that I make and what I learned from, I was just interviewing you on the show, and that's going to help me bring something more to my patients tomorrow. And hopefully, definitely my guests, my listeners as well.
So you just define success in different ways, right? So when you do a surgery and your patient does great and doesn't have complications and sings your praises and their X, Y, or Z is cured, that's success. When your practice is financially successful, that's success from a partner standpoint. Your podcast, you've redefined success in terms of the podcast. And for you, it is successful, even though it's not attached to dollar signs, right?
Yes, because if I did attach it to dollar signs, then it would be an abject failure. And that doesn't sound as good. That doesn't sit so well. So I've had to redefine it. I've had to put a circular peg in a square hole by changing the definition. Yes.
But it seems like you've done it well. So, but speaking of failure, would you be comfortable telling me about a true failure you've had, something where you're like, man, that was, whether it was a patient interaction or a business interaction, something where you're like, damn, that was bad?
I've got a couple in mind. So one would be they give out all these top doctor awards, right? Like some you have to buy and some they aggregate this information somehow. So I'm the guy with the podcast on how to communicate better with your patients, right? And yet somehow I haven't been on one of those lists. Like we have 250 doctors in the practice. I think we have like 190 that made so the fact that I am not on any of those lists ever I would regard that as a failure. So that's one failure. Yes. Yes, I'm the guy again who podcasts on doctor-patient communication, and the better you communicate with your patients, the more likely they are to sue you. And I've been sued 3 times. Okay. Twice were dropped, one settled. But still, that those are definitely not successes. And then the last failure is the podcast, is that like I see other colleagues that have podcasts and they have a lot more advertising than I do. They're building up their brands. They're pulling in a lot more downloads, a lot more reviews. And I think I'm doing this well. I think I'm doing a good job. And yet the downloads haven't been there to validate that. So yeah, those are a couple failures. But like I said with the podcast, like for me, I have decided that it's going to be an iterative process, and I'm going to keep changing things until either I run out of ideas, I run out of steam, or it does become a financial success where I can, because what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to just take a half a day off a week to
Mm-hmm.
focus on this rather than just hiding in my basement
Yeah.
after the kids go to bed and have that be the only time that I'm devoting to it.
Well, I mean, I think the fact that you verbalized that so well, and so funny about the top doctors list, and it cuts both ways. So when I first started, my entire dream in life was to make this list called Mainline Today Top Doctors. Like that's all I wanted out of the world. I just wanted to see my name, right? So whatever, it took 7, 8, 9 years. I don't know. Finally made it. I don't know. Felt great. I was never on the cover or anything like that. It's like literally like a snippet like this big that your mother had to highlight for anybody to see what it was. But I was happy I got it. And then continually made that list for like, I don't know, 8 or 9 years. Then one time I got the notification like, hey, you made this list. And then the issue came out and I wasn't named. So I quickly emailed the editor. I'm like, hey, you said I was on this list. I'm not on this list. And man, they hated me after that. I totally got like blackballed. So I have not made that list since in like 15 years, which, all that to say, like, it's nonsense. Like those things are so meaningless. I think, of course I Google stalked you a little bit. I think you're just what you do, what your patients say about you, how well spoken you are in these podcast episodes. I mean, that to me is like what really defines success, and your ability to say like, there have been some failures and I acknowledge them and here's what they are. I mean, being human about it, I think is a true measure of success too. So you've got all of these things that you do, but you went to med school. You didn't go to med school saying, I'm going to be a partner in a practice, or maybe you did, or I'm going to start a podcast. Why did you go to med school? Certainly not to learn the Krebs cycle. I know that. You've said that very well. I love that tagline. That's my favorite.
I have the worst reason for going to med school, and that is I didn't know what else to do.
Wow.
Right? Yeah, I didn't know what else to do. It was more like, well, I don't have any plan for my life whatsoever. And you know what? I think part of it was I worked my tail off in high school to get into the best college that I could. And when I did get into that college, I was, kind of burnt out from studying so hard in high school. Finally, I wasn't under my parents' thumb anymore. And I just, I wasn't in any, like in high school, teams and clubs and edited the newspaper and blah, 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 right? Stacked my resume, honors classes, right? In college, I was just like, I played rugby poorly for 2 years. And like, that was the only thing on my resume. And I didn't have, I really didn't have much going on. And then I studied abroad in Israel as a junior, and that in Jerusalem. And that city really, it's probably one of the most incredible cities in the world. And just being there and taking a step away from the rest of my life allowed me to take a step back and say, you know what, I want to do something with some gravity. I want to do something with some importance to it. And one of my friends there was applying to med school. So I was like, I'll do that. I'll do that too.
Wow. Wait, you just happened to have all the prereqs done and let me just take this MCAT.
Well, I was a science major already. It's called the biological basis of behavior, which has a lot of the overlaps with a lot of the prereqs anyway. So I just had to take a couple more classes. So I couldn't take orgo. I took orgo late, so I couldn't apply at the time. So I had to take a year off, and while I was applying, and then I ended up getting into one med school off the wait list by the skin of my teeth, and the rest is history. So,
okay,
not a great, like, I had this calling and I always knew I wanted to be a healer. No, I just didn't know what else to do.
Well, okay. But then you went to Georgetown for your residency and you were chief resident. So you must have been doing a lot of things right?
Yes,
did you step into your way in med school?
Yeah, it definitely med school and residency changed me. I tell my wife she would have liked me much more pre-residency because, the free time wasn't something that we had a lot of. None of us did. So every moment was valuable. And now I still kind of live my life that way, that each moment has to, she's like, just take a day, just relax. I'm like, no, I've got stuff to do. I've got this list. Can't we just hang around at the house this weekend? No, like on Monday, I want to be able to say, like, this is what we did this weekend, not just hang around the house. And so it really changed who I am, because I was totally fine in high school, or I guess junior high school, maybe, just sitting around and watching cartoons. Totally fine. Like, I was 13 years old, totally fine. So, I think that the training definitely fundamentally changed me, some ways for the better and in some ways for the worse. But yeah, like I got this fire under my butt to, I wanted to go into otolaryngology, which I knew was competitive. And so I needed to make sure that my grades were good. I needed to do research. And so, sometimes when my friends were hanging out, like I was in the hospital doing things that I needed to do. But then, in residency, I wasn't at the top of my class or anything. Yeah, I was the chief resident, but like, I didn't do some fancy fellowship or anything like that. Yes, Georgetown's competitive, and thank goodness, I got into that. I'm super grateful that I did, but I'm not like their pupil. Like they've got people that end up being chairs of departments and, groundbreaking research. And I'm just some schmo community otolaryngologist who does septoplasties and tonsillectomies all the time, which are very like routine and mundane. And I am fine with that. I am good at that. But I'm certainly not like the crown jewel of my residency program.
Brad, you have so much humility for that does not line up with your resume. I mean, that's just how I'm going to say it.
Is this a coaching session? Are you turning this into a site?
Listen, I'm going to mother you for a second.
Up a little, yeah.
No, I love that you are so humble about all of those things. But how important do you think that is to being a good doctor? How important would you say humility is? Because I think we all know how detrimental hubris is, and our profession has that in spades. I very rarely meet truly humble doctors. My husband, who's a pediatrician, who's like the lowliest of the egos in the doctor scale. Do you think that has served you well, or do you think it's a personality flaw?
A bit of both. A bit of both. I think if any of my patients are listening, I only do surgeries that I'm super comfortable doing, right? And so I'm not doing open neck surgery anymore. And I think this humility was maybe a problem in my residency training, because I was more likely to hand over the instruments to the attending and be like, listen, I'm not comfortable with this, or more apt to let that happen. And so then I ended up doing maybe fewer of them than I could have done, and then graduated with more confidence. Or if I had more confidence to begin with, I'm not sure where, the chicken and the egg is. But yes, I think to some degree it is to my detriment. But in other ways, it's to my credit, I think, because it allows me to try and improve myself in all of these different ways. But yes, it's at the same time, it's never enough. Right? It's finding that balance of when it's enough. And I think having my wife as my wife also helps, because she's a big cheerleader for me, and she's, we complement each other very well.
Well, I spend a lot of time talking to patients who go see these rock star doctors. They fly to X, Y, or Z doctor, and you're right outside Manhattan. So you have those guys, they're probably your neighbors and things, and they're supposedly going to give them the best care, but they can't get through the office visit because of the size of some of these doctors' egos. So I think before you can do a septoplasty on someone, you got to be able to have a conversation with them. You have to earn their trust, right? So it seems to me like you have a good balance from, the 37 minutes I've been talking to you. But I
think that's also there's a generational shift that's happening. And I think the
true.
older doctors are from the paternal age of medicine, where this is what I say and this is how it goes. And I think the younger doctors are being trained in the importance of the connection, the communication, and the art of that, and the science of that. I think are coming out more in training. When I started the podcast, as you said, the tagline is everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. And what I'm finding when I teach sometimes at the med school near me is a lot of the stuff that I originally included in my lecture, I had to take out because they are teaching it in med school. There are things that it is evolving. It's like turning a giant ship, but it does eventually start to turn. Hopefully not too little and not too late, but there are things about this that are being communicated. And I think that, you don't go into medicine expecting that and expecting to be there. And if I might say, I think they are also more likely, those older doctors were more likely to stay in the hospital longer. They were more likely when they're retiring to stay in the doctor's lounge, even after they've retired. And
that's all they had.
But right. They that's their whole identity. Yeah. And I think the younger doctors aren't going to do that. And I think it's because it's more taxing for us. Because when you can just tell someone how it's going to be and go home sleeping at night, thinking that you did a good job and they were wrong for just not listening to you. I think for us, it's the visits become more emotionally taxing when you don't have that paternal relationship. And you feel like you're really more in there with the patient, and you're trying to navigate their anxiety, and you're trying to navigate their psychosocial situation. Each visit becomes a little more taxing that way, and it becomes harder, becomes more draining.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you're, counting the days until you can retire. That's no way to end a illustrious career, right?
Yeah.
I want to ask you about a very specific thing, just because I'm dying to hear your opinion on this. So you're a surgeon, you do surgery, and you're obviously, modern, you have a podcast, you're working on the patient experience and all that. What do you think about the plastic surgeon who streamed her surgeries on TikTok? And follow-up question to that, do you think there is a place for, physicians who utilize social media to their professional gain? Do you think it's okay? Or do you think that we've kind of gone overboard?
So one, I am not a millennial. I am Generation X. So I don't know that situation.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I can't believe that. I'll have to tell you about it.
I might have read like a little bit about it or heard a little bit about it, but I think ultimately she ended up losing her license or something because she streamed the surgery. Yeah.
That's the whole story. Yep. So she streamed her surgery and lost her license.
Yeah. I mean, I think if the patient has full consent, it offers full, like maybe you're doing it for promotional reasons and the patient like getting something cosmetic, and you'll say, listen, I'll waive the fee if you agree to X, Y, and Z. This is where it's going to go. This is how big my reach is. Like, it's all full disclosure. I think it's reasonable as long as the patient's fully aware of what's going on. But you can't like do it, and because you like block out their tattoos or whatever mole they have, like just assume it's going to be anonymous. I think there are lines. And also, yes, we are held to a higher standard.
Right.
Your presence on social media, you need to behave as if your patients are watching your every move and assume that they are. Now, again, it's a different generation. There are doctors with purple hair. There are doctors with tattoos. There are like sleeve tattoos. And that is totally fine. Like, I think patients with sleeve tattoos are going to gravitate towards doctors with sleeve tattoos. And like that's, we need that. We need diversity of age, we need diversity of ethnicity, we need diversity of background, of culture, but we need all of that to better serve our patients, right? And so I think this old definition of professionalism needs to die. However, we still need to behave as if our patients are watching us. And there are some physicians that are on social media that, I mean, it doesn't pass the smell test, because they're so crude, and and you can't demean the patients. That's a line that should never be crossed. Like, I'm sure you know who Dr. Glaucom Flecken is, Will
Yes.
Flannery, the ophthalmologist.
Yeah.
He is a genius at always punching up. So if you're gonna try and make a joke, never ever punch down. He is always
That's
punching
right.
up, and he's hilarious, and he's so good. And it's easy to punch down. It's easy to make a joke and punch down. And so I think when you're posting on social media, you need to keep that in mind as well, and hold yourself to a high standard that you would be fine with, like your first grade teacher seeing. Like, this is what I've become. Yes, I'm so glad that that Mrs. McCabe, who was my first grade teacher, I'm sure, but would be proud to, see that this is, and I think you should really think that way when you're posting online. But like, this person who put her patient, like, yeah, that's why I think it's not okay.
Yeah. And as a surgeon too, I mean, what if something goes wrong and you've got like, you're live streaming and this guy, somebody's arteries like gushing all over, like, what the heck do you do with, I can't even imagine that. So no, you're right. Like, we definitely do need to hold ourselves to a higher standard, because I still, after all these years, take so much pride in my profession. I never cringe when people ask me what I do for a living, or when I run into my patients, outside of the office. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the service that I get to do for my community. I consider it a privilege.
And you had asked about being on social media. So I just want to mention, like, we should be on social media for a bunch of reasons. One is it's a great marketing tool for patients to find you and for referring providers to find you. It's another tool if you want to pivot in another way and be some type of like authority in your field. And the other is, there is so much misinformation out there. There is disinformation and misinformation, intentional and unintentional, incorrect information that's out there. And the only way to combat it is with more information coming from us, coming from physicians, health information coming from physicians. We are the authority. And if we're not out there giving correct information, then we're going to get drowned out by the misinformation and
nonsense,
which is already happening, and it's a battle that we're already losing. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't, put your gloves on and get into the fight and do what you can about getting good information out there for your patients, for your public. So I think if you're not interested, you're not interested. But should we be on social media? Yes.
I love that. And so that was an excellent segue to, I have two final questions for you. The first is COVID. Did you come out of COVID a better doctor, a saltier doctor, a more tired doctor? How do you think the whole COVID situation affected your practice as a doctor?
We're definitely busier. We're definitely busier, because I think it took a lot of the doctors that were on the brink of retirement and pushed them into retirement.
Yeah.
And so then the rate of retirement outpaced the new physicians in the area. So we're definitely busier. The COVID experience, I think, definitely, saltier, because of the whole disinformation and misinformation. Yep. Right? The fact that, like, people were like, healthcare workers, yay, will I get vaccinated? No. All that distrust of physicians and the villainizing of people that were just trying to do their best with the information they had. But I think another thing is we've gotten smarter about it. I think we're, those in the government, those in public health, those in science communication are learning from that experience so that we can get better at communicating the next time around. And hopefully we'll be better at combating the misinformation and the disinformation, the real
just
disingenuous, incorrect information.
right. I mean, I think the more doctors like you that are out there reestablishing people's faith in the healthcare profession, the less likely we are to have to be in that position to battle the nonsense. I think we just have to reestablish ourselves as authorities by being respectable and having our patients trust us again.
Exactly. It's one patient at a time.
Exactly.
Like if all of us are just, connecting better with that one patient at a time, they're going to trust us more, so that you don't have to get into this. I had like 5 episodes with science communicators on how to convince your patients to get vaccinated.
Oh,
And
wow.
it became too much. Like the number of times that I tried to engage with people and like do this little dance where I'm kind of bobbing and weaving around what they're saying, what I'm saying. It became taxing, and that's one way that I became saltier, but at the same time, better.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, thankfully it's a once in a lifetime event, hopefully. But yeah, I mean, I think all of us that are still practicing came out of it a little hardened, but honestly better in some ways too.
Yes.
So this is what I want to close with. You have 3 sons. I have 3 kids too. Would you, if your sons came to you and said, Dad, we want to be doctors, would that make you happy, or would you try to talk them out of it? And whichever the answer is, why?
So my sister-in-law, my brother's wife, is a physician as well, and she has a good way of putting it. If you can't think of anything else that would make you happy, then go ahead. But I would definitely be also coaching them in the background about all the different lessons related to medicine, like the entrepreneurial aspects that put you in a position that you are not beholden to the health system that you're in. Like that's one thing that I've learned from all of the physicians online that are like financially independent or at least financially savvy, is they've all put themselves, or at least are moving towards positions where they're not beholden to this healthcare system, because as physicians, we are often management material in a labor position. And so,
excellent.
We were at the top of our class, and like in any other industry, we would be in management positions. But in this industry, we are not. We're high earners, but we just see patients.
We're doing the grunt work
over and over. Exactly. And so, I would want them to, have their eyes open into all the different ways in which things are happening around them, so that they aren't stuck in the labor position indefinitely.
Great answer. So it's not like, oh, medicine is the best, I would definitely be a doctor, or don't ever be a doctor, it's the worst thing ever. There's qualifications.
Yeah. I think hedonic adaptation sets in everywhere. And so there needs to be a way to continuing to evolve in your professional life so that it keeps it stimulating.
Great. Beautiful answer, Brad. So if, as a physician, entrepreneur, podcaster, all of the things you do, if you could leave our listeners, specifically doctors considering a private practice or thinking about branching out on their own, if you were going to leave them with one piece of advice, what would it be?
Getting back to what you said earlier, is you have to think about how you're defining success for you in this moment. How do you define success? Is it financial success? Is that how you're looked upon by your peers? Is it how you're looked upon by your family? Is it how you think about yourself? In what regard? Like, what is your measure of success right now? So make sure that whatever you're doing is in line with your definition of success, or at least you're working towards whatever definition that is. And also recognize that will evolve over time. So if you do go into private practice, once you're established, check in with yourself and see again, how are you defining success now, and how are you working towards that goal? I know it's very nebulous and out
No,
there,
it's excellent
but
advice.
that goalpost is gonna move, and so make sure that you recognize that you are moving it when you're moving it, but first, establish where you want that goalpost to be so you can work towards it.
Yeah, perfect advice. If you don't know where you want to be, you'll never know how to get there. So I think that's excellent. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. Everyone listening, my guest was Dr. Bradley Block, an esteemed otolaryngologist in New York. CV a mile long. Most interesting to me is Dr. Block's podcast, A Physician's Guide to Doctoring. Please check it out for some really insightful interviews with other physicians. Brad, I appreciate you so much. I hope I can talk to you again.
Me too. It's been a pleasure.